You can solve the entire cube without having to memorize any algorithms or using any tricks. And that's what I want to show you how to do that in this video. Now, the requirement for that, for this video, is you need to be a wizard of the first layer. You need to know how to solve the first layer, but not just that, you need to know how to do some manipulations, which I'll talk about in a minute. And only if you can do that, then you'll be able to solve the rest of the video. Now, if you can't do it, it's fine. In part 2 and part 3, we will tackle these two things. Now, even if you don't know how to solve the first layer, I encourage you to watch this entire video. Think of it as a big picture. The idea is to get the logic behind solving the entire cube. By the end of this video, you will have everything you need. And then if you don't know how to solve the first layer or do the manipulations, you can watch my part 2 and part 3 and get all the requirements and then solve the cube. So disclaimer is though, I will not give you a move set, no algorithms, but with persistence, with some, if you're curious and if you like to spend a lot of time and if you like solving puzzles, this is the best way to solve. All right, let's get started. 4 manipulations you need to be able to do. Manipulation 1 is you need to know how to flip an edge without affecting the rest of the cube. Here's what I mean. So let me show you what happens when I flip it. And I'm going to speed it up because I don't want you to copy my moves. All right, so this is what you need to be able to do. Notice I did not affect the rest of the top layer. So that's one. Flip just one edge. The second manipulation you should be able to do is the same thing with a corner. You need to be able to flip just one corner. And again, and for a corner, you have 2 colors. So you need to be able to either bring the red on top or bring the blue on top. I'll do one of them, but you should be able to do the other as well. So again, I'll speed it up. Like this. I brought the red on the top. Notice rest of the top layer is unaffected. The third thing you need to be able to do is to swap 2 edges. For example, swap these 2 edges without affecting the top layer. And again, in all these cases, you're free to screw up the bottom, okay? That's the whole point. Okay, if I hadn't mentioned it, you're free to screw up the bottom. So let me show you what this would look like. Again, speeding it up. There you go. Notice I flipped only these 2 edges and kept the rest of the top intact. And the fourth thing you need to be able to do is something very similar for the corners. You need to learn how to swap just 2 corners without affecting the rest of the top layer. Again, let me quickly show you that. There you go. Notice I swapped these 2 corners, but I kept the rest of this intact. And sometimes you might need to be able to swap these 2 corners, and similarly, you might need to be able to swap these 2 edges as well. So it would be nice if you can figure that out as well, but it's not really necessary. I think you can just solve the entire cube with just these 4 moves. And so your first step would be figuring out how to do these 4 manipulations. And trust me, this is a lot of fun and it's doable because you're only manipulating the top layer, only one layer, and you're completely free to screw up the bottom. So there are less constraints over here, and yeah, I think I was able to do it, and I guess you would be able to do it as well. And guess what? There are multiple ways of carrying out these manipulations. That's what makes it even more fun. So what you might come up with and what your friend might come up with might be different, and it would be fun to sit together and compare. But at this point, you can be a skeptic. You should be a skeptic and ask, but Mahesh, if these 4 manipulations screw up the bottom, how can I possibly use this to solve the entire cube? For example, let's say we have solved the first 2 layers and we are working on the last layer and we're carrying out these manipulations. Then in doing so, won't that screw up the bottom 2 layers? So how can I solve the entire cube with that? That's a great question. So now that brings us to the $1 million question. Once you do these manipulations, we screw up the bottom, right? So now comes the big question, how do you fix the bottom? Once you screw them up, once you screw the bottom up by carrying out these four moves, how do you fix the bottom up? That's the big question. And it turns out that you can do that as well logically. Again, no need to come up with new moves. Whatever moves that you have come up with, you can just use those to logically fix the bottom as well. And now we're reaching the climax of the video. Let me show you how to do this. And I think it's a little easier to do this with a solved cube. So let me bring in a solved cube. So here's our solved cube. The big question now is how do we carry out these 4 manipulations? And once we screw the bottom up, how do you fix the bottom? So let me take the first example. Let's say I use my own moves to flip this edge. Let me quickly do that. All right, notice in doing so, I have screwed up the bottom. So question now is how do I fix the bottom? And the answer is, drum rolls, just undo everything you did. I mean, think about it. If I do all the moves in the reverse order, then I would fix it because it's kind of like going back in time. Let me quickly show you that. And voila, I just undid all my own moves, and you would undo all your own moves and you would just fix the bottom 2 layers. But of course, you may have noticed that also means we're gonna undo the flip that we did, and so we're back to square one. So you would ask, what's the point of this? You're right. So let me go forward one more time. All right, so now we know when we undo, what are the things that are gonna happen? First, we know the bottom 2 layers are gonna get fixed, which is great. We also know that the edge in front of us is gonna get flipped, which is not so great, okay. It's gonna get flipped. But there's a third important thing to remember. The rest of the top layer will be unaffected by our undo, because when we did our forward moves, the rest of the top layer was unaffected. So if the forward moves don't affect the top layer, undoing will also not affect the top layer. Does that make sense? None of those 4 manipulations are affecting the rest of the top layer. And so when you undo, the rest of the top layer will also stay unaffected. Hopefully that makes sense. So how can we use this now? Well, since I know the rest of the top layer is unaffected, and I'm repeating this, I know, okay. But since I know that, what I will do now is I will move this edge out of the way, and I'll now undo everything. And this is the climax, folks. This is the moment of truth. What do you think is gonna happen if I undo all my moves now? I want you to pause the video and think a little bit about this. All right, hopefully you've given it a try. So we know if I undo, the bottom 2 layers are gonna get fixed, great. We know the edge in front of us is gonna get flipped, which means this edge will now get flipped. I don't know how to feel about that. We'll come back to that in a moment. But what's important, we know the rest of the top layer is unaffected, which means this edge will stay as it is. So let me go ahead and undo everything. And voila, just like we predicted, while I undid, the bottom 2 layers got fixed, the edge in front of us got flipped as we predicted, and the rest of the top layer did not change at all. And notice in doing so, what did we end up achieving? I'll just undo the flip that I did. We ended up just flipping 2 pieces, 2 edges, and kept the rest of the cube intact. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the secret. So notice by using the undo, for all these 4 manipulations, you can fix the bottom. So that's the good thing. You can apply this to all the 4 manipulations, same logic, just undo. But you also see a downside of that. The downside is, or the complication or the caveat that gets added now is, you can't just flip one edge. You will have to flip 2 edges at the same time. And why is that happening? Well, that's because in your forward move sequence, you flip 1 edge. And when you undo, you bring the other edge in its piece, and that's get flipped. So you always work with 2 edges. It can be these 2, it can be these 2, because while undoing, I could have brought in this edge over here. This could be these 2. But you always flip 2 edges at the same time. And the same thing applies to all the 4 manipulations. For example, if I were to flip one of the corners without affecting the rest of the cube, the second maneuver, again, we would have screwed up the bottom. But to fix the bottom, I'll undo everything. But before I undo, I'm gonna bring some other corner in its position. So let's say I bring this corner in its position, and I'm gonna undo everything I just did. And notice, I fixed the bottom. I ended up flipping this corner as well. Rest of the cube is unaffected. So if I bring it back, we now end up flipping only 2 corners and kept the rest of the cube unaffected. Same thing applies for swapping as well. If I want, I can swap these 2 using my own moves. But because now I've screwed up the bottom, I'll have to fix the bottom by undoing everything. But while undoing, I'll have to bring some other 2 edges in this place. I can either bring these 2 edges in this place and I'll end up swapping these 2, Or I can just do one turn and bring these two edges in this place. And now I'll end up, while undoing, end up swapping these two. Notice we did that, bottom got fixed, and finally we ended up moving these three pieces. And the same thing applies for the fourth one as well. So just to quickly summarize, what have we learned so far? We understood that if you know how to do these four manipulations using your own moves, then you can undo everything. But before undoing, you bring some other piece or some other pair in its position and undo. And in doing so, what you'll now end up doing is using your own moveset, you'll be able to manipulate not one, but either two pieces at the same time, flipping them, or two pairs of pieces at the same time while swapping them. But the big idea is the rest of the cube got unaffected, and I know I'm stressing this, but you used your own moves. So now let me go ahead and convince you that just by doing this, you can solve the entire cube. So I have a cube that is like completely scrambled, and believe me, I've like randomly scrambled it. What I'm gonna do now is go ahead and solve this. And as I solve it, I'm gonna show you which of these four moves that I'm using. And hopefully you'll get convinced that that's all you need. Not the most effective way, you're not gonna set any world records, but it's the most fun way to do this. All right, so the first thing I do is I go ahead and solve my white. Let me just clear the lighting. All right, so there we go. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and solve my white layer first. And like mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is something that you should be able to do it yourself. So let me go ahead and quickly do that. All right, there we go. I've solved the white. And now let's use these four moves and the whole logic of undoing, which is by the way called the commutator. This logic is called the commutator logic. All right, so let's go ahead and use those to solve the rest of the cube. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna start solving the second layer, and then I'll solve the third layer. So let me start by solving, say, this one. I'm randomly picking. So if I want to solve this edge, I need a green, yellow, green, red. So I search for it. Where is my green, red edge? My green, red edge is somewhere over here, here. I want to bring it on the top. So how can I use these four manipulations to bring this on the top? Well, my manipulation only works for the first layer, right? Or at least the top layer. So what I want to do is I'm going to treat this as the top layer. All right. And this piece, I'm going to bring it to the top layer. And the way I do that is, look at this. I just have to maybe do this one turn. So I'm just going to keep remembering what turns I have to do. So to bring this to the top layer, I bring this to the top, I do one turn like this, and I do one more turn like this. And notice now I brought this to the top layer. And now I can swap them. That's the whole logic. That's the whole idea. So you bring the pieces that you need to the top layer, carry out these four manipulations. But remember, once I swap them, then what I'll do is I'll undo whatever I did. So what did I do? What are the things that I did? So I did this and I did this, right? So I just have to remember what moves I did to bring this to the top layer, and after swapping everything, I just undo. So I do this and I do this, and hopefully I don't forget that. I just have to turn like this and turn like this. Okay, kept that in my memory. Okay, I'm gonna swap this. But there's a second problem. Second problem is you can't just swap two pieces. You have to swap another pair as well. Now, since this is a useless edge, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna swap this and I'm gonna swap that. So this will come over here. When I swap this, okay, when I swap this, this will come here, this will come here, this will get fixed. And then I'll swap these two, which is useless for me. I don't care about that. So I'm just gonna do that. So let me first swap this. So I'm gonna carry out the swapping maneuver. So notice I swapped these two. Everything got screwed. I know about that. I just gonna undo everything. And to do that, I'm gonna swap these two. So I'm gonna bring these two in its place. And I'm gonna undo everything. All right, so I undid everything. I'm gonna undo my turn as well. And now I'm gonna undo those initial things that I did, which hopefully I haven't forgotten. This, okay. So I did this and I did this, and notice I fixed this particular edge. And this is what I love about this technique. You know, it's just so much fun to do this. It takes way more time. There are much faster ways to do this, and I know the faster ways, of course. I've learned them as well. But the idea is, you know, this is more fun. I like doing it this way. Okay, and I'm gonna continue doing the same thing. I'm gonna fix this edge now, and I'm gonna search where this edge is, and luckily this edge is just over here. So I can just hold it like this, and I'm gonna say, all I have to do is swap these two. Makes sense, right? I need this to come here, so I'm gonna swap these two. But along with that, I need to swap something else. Now, okay, here's something, okay, here's more fun. These two are already solved. I don't wanna mess them up. So what do I do? So I want to swap them, and I need to find another edge pair to swap while undoing it. And the way I do that is I'm gonna bring another useless edge, which is this one. This is useless, the third layer, I'm not gonna worry about that. I'm gonna bring it in this position. So I'll swap these two, and then I will swap these two, and then I'll bring this back. Does that make sense? All right, so I'm gonna swap these two, then I'll swap these two, which is these two, and then we'll bring them back. Okay, again, let me quickly swap this. All right, so I swapped them. Now I have to undo everything, and while undoing, I'm gonna swap these two. So I'm gonna bring these two in its position, undo. And I finished undoing, and now I have to undo. So I'm gonna undo that turn that I did. And now I have to undo that initial rotation that I did. And there we go, that's back. And I fixed, which one? It was this one? Was it this one? Okay, or maybe it was this one. I fixed this edge. And I repeat the same process for these two. So I'm just gonna go ahead and fast forward this. Oh, let me just show you. I mean, you can just fast forward if you want. Why should I do it? So where is this one? Where is this edge? This edge is over here. So I'm gonna just bring this up over here, and I'm gonna say, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna swap these two. But if I do that, it's gonna flip over. See, this is not in the right orientation. So I'm gonna bring it over here, and I'm gonna say, okay, I need to swap these two. So let me just go ahead and do that. And again, I'm gonna bring some useless edge in its in its position, swap these two, same moves, quickly do this. All right, so swap these two, and I'm gonna swap these two. And there we go. And now I just have to undo that turn that I did when I brought this useless edge. And there we go. Fixed 3 edges. And now I have to fix the 4th one. In fact, let me tell you, if you can get more clever, more smarter ways of doing it, is you can fix 2 edges at the same time, right? That's possible. I just didn't want to do it right now because I'm doing it live, a little nervous. I don't want to do too many complicated moves, but that's also more fun of doing. That's also fun. All right, so I have the last one to fix, and that's over here. Okay, that's over here. I have to bring this over here. Same concept. I'm just gonna do that again. So bring a useless edge in its piece so that I can do that undo swapping, swap these two, and undo that initial turn, and undo that useless turn. Okay, and I'm done. So notice I have solved to the second layer. And what manipulations that I have to use? I only had to use the swapping manipulation. And sometimes you'll have to do a flipping manipulation. Sometimes, for example, you will find that one of these edges is flipped. And so you'll have to do the flipping manipulation. And the same idea, to undo that flipping, you'll have to bring some other useless edge, or maybe you can use this edge to undo. You get the point. So that brings us to the last layer, and we can continue using this for manipulations. For example, what I would like to do now is to flip up all my yellows. So I'll start by flipping up the edges. So I'm gonna use the flip maneuver. So notice I have 2 edges which need to be flipped up, which is perfect. And so I'll flip this up, and while undoing, I'll flip this up. So again, flipping maneuver. All right, flipped it, bottom got screwed. I'm gonna bring this over here and undo everything. And voila, notice they got flipped, bottom 2 got solved, perfect. Now I need to flip these 2 corners. Again, corner flipping maneuver. I'm gonna flip this corner maybe, and then while I undo, I'm gonna flip this corner. So let's do that. So I like to hold it this way. Okay, let me flip it like this. All right, there we go. And that my cube is almost solved. I was lucky that these corners just happen to be in the right place. But sometimes, actually most of the times, the corners won't be in the right place, which means I'll have to do the corner swapping maneuver, and I have to think a little bit about which corners to swap and which corners to undo. But anyways, I got lucky over here, and let me use my luck. So what else is needed to finish the cube off now? I just need to swap the edges again. And I need to think a little bit about which edges to swap first. So I would like to swap these two first. So the green would come over here, blue would come over here, and then I'll swap these two. All right, so let me carry out the last swapping maneuver. All right, swap these two. Now I'm gonna undo. So to undo, I'm gonna bring this in its place. Let me undo. And there we go. The whole cube got solved. And I know you may not have followed me, but that the point was, hopefully I've convinced you that all you needed was these 4 manipulations. Now, one question you might be having is there a way to just flip one edge or just to flip one corner? Is there any move set? Turns out, no, you can't do that. And you may ask, how do I know that? Maybe I haven't figured it out. Well, it turns out that mathematically one can prove that you can't just flip one edge, or you just can't flip one corner, or you just can't swap one pair. You always have to work with 2 at a time. And I don't know the exact mathematical way to prove that, but if I think from the commutator logic point of view, it makes sense. While doing forward moves, you'll have to swap one pair or flip one piece. And while doing the undoing, you have to swap something else or unflip something else. So that makes sense. All right. So hopefully I've convinced you and I've gotten you pumped up and excited about solving the cube yourself. So if you have a cube and if you're a beginner, it's completely fine. First step would be to work on solving the first layer, being very comfortable when doing that. And if you can't, it's fine. There are some tutorials, you can look at them up. Then figuring out how to do these 4 manipulations and having fun with them. And once you have them, then you can use the commutator logic and just solve the rest of the cube. So happy cubing. I hope there will be more people in this world who can solve the cube intuitively now. And one last thing before I close, if you are having troubles with these 4 manipulations, I'm gonna make another video in which I will show you how I do these manipulations. And the hope is you can use that as an inspiration, hopefully, to come up with your own moves. I'll give you some tricks about how we extract in general, how can you think about extracting pieces and all of those things. So I'll do those separately in another video. See you, bye. But hopefully you won't need those videos, so bye.